introduce our keynote speaker to you today. I've known him for about 10 years. Originally, we met when I was a grad student at the University of Texas at Tyler. He was a professor there. I can tell you that he's the only graduate professor to ever give me a B. And one of the last assignments I turned in his class, he put a big old X through it, and at the bottom he wrote "incoherent rambling." It's really made me feel special. And years later, I reflect back on that, and I know that he was trying to challenge me. He had high expectations for all his students. And if you ask him today, he'll tell you that he didn't give me that B, I earned that B. And he's right, he's right. He's a champion of kids, he's a champion of teachers. He spent his entire career working at the highest levels to make public education better across the state of Texas. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Timothy Jones.
Wow, I may have to rethink that day. Thank you, Jeremy. Good morning. I'm excited to be here this morning to spend a little bit of time with you and, I don't know, maybe throw out a thing or two that you can use somewhere down the road. I didn't sleep very well last night. As long as I've been in this, and this, I guess, officially starts my 29th year in education, not including the student years. And I still have that anxiety of the start of school. You know, that kind of, that little bit of nervousness and tightness in the stomach as school gets started and we start thinking about getting school ready. And so I had some of those emotions last night in a positive way, but if I nod off, that's probably why. I'll tell you, I learned a couple of lessons last week on vacation. I was in Florida, and if you ever need to remember the real reason why we're here and the real reason why we're on the earth, go on vacation with a 4-year-old who turns 5. It's amazing how much they bring you back to center, and I'm going to tell you a couple of Gracie stories during the course of the morning. But before we do that, who's new? Where's the new teachers? Raise up hand, be proud. You are here doing the Lord's work. I admire each and every one of you. And how many of you, this is your first gig as a teacher? Congratulations. You have started your path on a truly wonderful, incredible journey of education in Texas that is changing faster than most of us can hardly keep up with. And so I congratulate you on that, and I congratulate you on coming to such a great school district. It's exciting to be here. There's a lot of familiar faces. I have known several of you for a while, in addition to Dr. Glenn, and it's been really nice to kind of rekindle some of that. I'm going to try to leave you this morning in the 2.5 hours I'm going to be speaking to you. That was a joke. Actually, the 40 minutes or so that I'm going to speak to you, I'm going to try to leave you with four important things, and see if they're not some things that you can use this semester and this year as you get school started. The first of those 4 things that I want to talk to you a little bit about, I actually learned from an administrator in Nacogdoches about 15 years ago. And I don't know if any of you remember or knew Eli Poole, who was an assistant principal at Nacogdoches High School. But he embarked upon me early in my career. In fact, when I was a student teacher, which I guess wasn't 15 years ago, it would be more like 29 years ago, 30 years ago. But Eli told me, he said, if you don't remember anything else about kids, remember this. He said, every child deserves a new school and a loss report card at least once a year. Just kind of think about that. Every kid deserves a new school and a loss report card at least once a year. The younger they are, the more of those that we need to give them. And so as school starts on Monday, obviously we want to give them a clean slate. But just think about all the little things that kids do that we kind of got to remind ourselves to forget about. And I think about the first year that I taught. I don't know about y'all, but my first year I thought was a great year. I thought everything was wonderful until I taught my second year, and I looked back on my first year, and I'm not so sure that I taught them anything. I think I was so much better in year 2 than I was in year 1. But I had a student, we'll call him Jay. We've changed names to protect the not so innocent. But Jay was one of those kids that had not developed in the way of appropriateness. Y'all know who I'm talking about. He particularly as a 7th grader, he embraced language skills that were puzzling at best. One of his favorite words was that F word that he miraculously could use as a verb, as a noun, as an adjective, as an adverb, often in the same sentence. And as a new teacher, of course, the first time that he used one of those choice words, you know, I just flew off the handle and was offended, and as anybody would be. And so I kind of set out that year that Jay and I were going to clean up his language. And that even though I try to help kids develop in their own way, etc., there were certain norms that were going to be non-negotiable with him, and one of which was the use of that particular word. And so I have to tell you that over the course of the year, we had great challenges in removing that word from Jay's vocabulary. And it got frustrating at times, and he got tired of spending Thursday afternoons in my class after school for infractions of using that particular word. And by the 3rd or 4th or the 5th month of trying to get him to just take a deep breath before you speak and think about what you're going to say instead of that first gut-wrench reaction, you know, by Christmas I was getting so tired of saying the same thing over and over to him. And about the 2nd week of December, we had his ARG for the year. And while I didn't like his language anymore, I have to tell you, when I met his mother, I understood him better. Because she talked just like him. And just imagine sitting in an ARD meeting of professional adults and this child's mother using the same superlative in many of the same particular ways. And so I really started to understand that, you know, he's kind of fighting the tide against the tide, because he goes home and what's reinforced with him over and over and over again becomes second nature, and then he comes to school the next day and we're not going to let him do that. And so after the Christmas holidays, I sat down with him and kind of in that context kind of talked him through what we were going to try to do. And I have to tell you, we had a much better spring, both in my not getting so frustrated, but also him not swearing so much. But it took me meeting his mother for me to forgive him a little bit for that which he brought to the table. It never changed my expectation of him, because he was not going to talk that way in my presence, in the presence of his classmates, or in school if I had anything to say about it. So, what's number one? Every kid deserves a new school and a loss report card at least once a year. Second thing I want to leave you with today: celebrate small successes. I think if I learned anything as a middle school teacher, it was you got to celebrate the little stuff. When the right little girl smiles for the first time at the right little boy, it doesn't matter what you're teaching that day. It doesn't matter how well you teach it. For that day, and maybe a day or two later, that child, or maybe even both of them, are going to be somewhere else. And so they appreciate, as well you, celebrating those little things kind of as you go along the way. And who's the middle school teachers? Raise your hand up. Okay, again, doing the Lord's work. Nobody understands why we like middle school. I mean, how many times have you been told, well, don't you want to move up, as in, you know, the high school's a promotion or something? You know, I got confronted with that as a teacher a couple of times. I got confronted with that as an administrator. Don't you want to move up? No, I want to stay where I'm the intellectual equivalent of the kids. But thank you. Middle school's a great place to make a living. I mean, it really is. It's a wonderful place, particularly if you can laugh and not take too serious the weird little hormonal stuff that middle schoolers do. Because it isn't them. It's their hormones that are talking. It's their hormones that are acting out. It's not them doing it. And you can imagine little Jay. I mean, sometimes he'd get frustrated with a teacher or two, and after we let go of one word, it seemed like he would replace it with something else. And once you realize that he's not really sitting at home plotting against you, that it's just his little hormones at work, and it's his adolescence, and he's fighting his body on all this stuff that it's doing to him, then it's a lot easier to enjoy middle schoolers. They actually provide a great variety in the days of activity. And so, I can remember when I interviewed middle school teachers, it was always about, you know, how do you appreciate adolescence? Because if you can't appreciate adolescence, you're going to be miserable as a middle school teacher, and the kids are going to be miserable with you as a middle school teacher. Now, I've got to tell you about something that I'm awfully proud of here a number of years later, and I got to talk a little bit about one of your colleagues. And I had an opportunity in 1995 basically to design my own school for Nacogdoches ISD. And I think back and I think about the courage that my superiors had to have in order for me to do it. And so I sat down with the assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction and said, you know, here's kind of what I'd like to do, but I kind of want I want us to pick some really cool teachers that really understand and love kids and can appreciate them for all the things that they do right and the things that they do wrong. And we kind of invent school. And so the assistant sup at that time said, you know, it sounds like something we ought to do at the middle school, which I was great with because that's where most of my experience was. And I went and sat down with the principal of the school at the time, and he was unhappy with one of the programs that they had, the reading improvement program. He wasn't unhappy with the content, what have you. He was unhappy with the results that some of the kids were getting from it, and the teachers were working awfully hard, and they felt like that was something that maybe we could reinvent and improve. Well, guess who I met? I met a lady named Sharon Hill. Sharon, stand up. Let us all applaud you. If I have ever met a truly gifted educator, it is Sharon Hill. And if you have never seen her make the magic, which I've been able to do many times, it is truly, truly inspiring. And I learned a lot about teaching in the years that we worked. But we sat down with another colleague of ours who had been working with Sharon at Thomas J. Russ Middle School, and we sat down and basically said, if we were the learner, if we were the student, and we were going to build a school just for us, what would it look like? What would it feel like? And how would it be different than traditional instruction? And we spent a whole summer working, and this is, I'll tell you one thing that I probably would have done over again. And I got to tell you something about Sharon. Sharon's colleagues never, I can speak from experience, get a day off. If there is something that you can be doing to make things better, Sharon will tell you. In many different ways, until it gets done. And that's one of the things I love about her. And so it never mattered how good things were going. When I showed up, there was something I needed to be doing. And not only did that make me better, it made our program better. And I think in looking back, the one thing we might have done a little bit different is we spent the whole summer working on the environment and the methods that we were going to use in learning for our program. And we decided that we would just write the curriculum as we went. And that was very stressful for everybody, let me tell you. Because we basically stayed maybe a week ahead of the kids that first year. But what we built was a truly learner-centered program, where everything about learning centered around the learner. You would walk into we kind of created a work environment. The kids kind of felt like they were coming to work. They had their mailbox and they had their day planners. We taught 7th graders, 8th graders how to use day planners, how to plan their week. They didn't have any schedule other than they had the responsibility of logging, clocking at least 4 hours a week in each of their content areas. But if they wanted to work on math all day on Monday, they could do that. They all had some electives, so during the course of the day they may head out for their elective, but they would schedule that like you would schedule a meeting with a parent or what have you. And what we didn't realize was that we built really an oasis for kids. And where we started with 42 the first year, and the kids
all at risk.
Were all at risk except one.
And he was really at risk.
And he was a little at risk.
He was at risk.
But he was yes, correct. He was at risk in a little bit different way. But he was also regarded as probably the smartest kid in the school. And if you want to make reading improvement kids feel good about who they are, put them in the program with the smartest kid in the school. Because all of a sudden, we weren't a program about at-risk kids. We were a program about the kids that learn the most. And over the next few months, we became the most popular place to be in the school. And I don't think any of us thought that's what would happen in the beginning. But we had one rule only. It's really easy to have good classroom management if you only have one rule. And that one rule was be on task. And all the staff, all the teachers ever had to do if somebody wasn't was, what is your task? Because about the only way that you got punished in that program was to not have a task and be on that task. And I was really kind of amazed by that. But it got invented, a large part from Sharon Hill, in creating school the way I think she would have loved to have learned as a learner, and in which her students thrived, absolutely thrived. And if I die today, if this is it, I speak to y'all and I go meet my Maker, I am so grateful that we had our time together, Sharon. And being back here with you today is absolutely incredible for me. And I thank you for that. I'll probably tell you another Silver Team story or two before the day is up. But those kids thrived because we celebrated everything. We celebrated the small stuff. Because at the end of the day, to an adolescent, it's all small stuff. Even the day that you divide fractions, to them, that's small stuff. It may be big stuff to you, but it's absolutely small stuff to them. One of the things that I learned from Sharon and Michelle was the other colleague that started the school with us that I think is really worth talking about. It's the third thing I want to leave you with today. And that is, school will never be an exciting place for your students if it isn't an exciting place for you. It's got to be exciting for you first. You can't make it exciting for them and not be excited yourself. So I want you to think for a minute. Is your class exciting? Exciting doesn't mean that if the kids told you the top 5 places they want to be today, they would pick your class. That doesn't have to be the standard. But if they come to class, and we want them to do that, is it an exciting place? Is it an engaging place? Is it a place that they walk out at the end of class going, ah? Now, how many of you saw the movie Teachers? 1, 2, come on, get them up high. Okay, not too many, so I'm going to tell you the story. But the movie Teachers had a teacher. You know how movies depict us so horribly? You know, we're always a little nutty, a little crazy. We do weird stuff. Well, Teachers is right there with it. One of the teachers, who, and I have to admit, he was incredibly funny because I think I knew him. I think he worked in my school that I taught at once. But they called him Ditto. That was his nickname. You can imagine why. Every morning, and the younger teachers aren't going to remember the old Ditto machines, that you really had to be a gifted Dittoer in order to get enough copies out of the Ditto before the ink was too light and you couldn't use the copies. That goes back a ways, but that's before Xerox copiers were in all the schools, and that's just in my career that the Xerox copiers came out. But Ditto spent every morning doing the Dittos for the day. And you see him as the movie starts and he's in the lounge and he's got the old Ditto machine that you actually crank with your hand. And he's just cranking those puppies out one after another. Takes them out, he collates them. There weren't collators then. You had to do your own collation. And what you usually did is you spread them out on a table and you'd get 3 or 4 of the people to help you. And you'd pick up the first stack, pick up the stack, and keep going. Then there was a stapler at the end. You staple it, and then you go back and you start again. And you keep doing that until you run out of Dittos. And there was never the same number of copies of each page. Never. So Ditto does his Dittos. He gets all ready and goes to class and sets a stack of Dittos behind the last chair of each row. Now this is good classroom management, right? He's getting organized so that things will be very efficient. And Ditto's efficiency was amazing. Now interestingly enough, the chairs all faced away from him. So the kids came in and they sat with their faces in the opposite direction. But they came in and they sat down, Ditto at his desk. The bell would ring. The last child on each row got up, retrieved the Dittos, gave each student one in the row in which they were at the back of, and learning started, so to speak, as they started working through their Ditto. Ditto, being so organized, everybody working, had time to read the newspaper, which he did each and every day, cover to cover. And the kids would do their thing with incredible efficiency until the bell would ring. And then, like a well-oiled machine, the person on the first of the row got up, collected the dittos, dropped it back on the desk behind the last chair, and the class then exited. Next class would come in, the process would be repeated. Now, amazing efficiency. There was very little loss of time on task. I'm not sure I'd call it instructional time, but we can debate that. All right? Well, you know what happens. Third period one day, Ditto dies. And yet his class carries on the rest of the day. Nobody notices until finally by sixth period, the newspaper falls out of one of his hands, and so then you've got Ditto dead with the newspaper up like this. But the interesting thing about that is, and Dr. Glenn can probably tell you stories that I used to tell in class. We had Ditto on our campus, but Ditto was a she. And what really fascinated me was that everyone thought she, her name was Helen, was really, really good. If a parent had a child out sick with mono, which happens in middle school, may miss 3 weeks of school, and they would stop by to see if there was work that they could pick up for the child, Helen, with amazing speed, could retrieve everything the child had missed, nice and neat in a manila folder, and hand it to the parent. The parent would be so dazzled with how efficient that was. Well, guess what? It was a folder full of dittos. And yet the child would come back to school, would be all caught up, everything completed. Now, how exciting was learning for those kids? Because it's never going to be exciting for them until it's exciting for her. And I think that one of the things about her class, she may have had 75 years of experience, because she'd been there since Rocks and Water. That might be a little bit of an exaggeration. But what's true and what's absolute about it was that I bet she didn't learn much that first year like I hope I did. And she simply did the same thing every year, year after year, to where she could tell you on September the 3rd what they would be doing on March the 8th. You know, some of the best lessons I've ever taught, I thought up walking to class. I have such a hard time writing down what I'm going to say or do when I'm in front of people, whether it's I'm teaching class or talking to a group of teachers and folks like I am y'all. Because then it becomes all about what I've written down and not about the audience and connecting and us sharing and learning from one another. And so I challenge you to question this year everything you do from the standpoint of, am I making school exciting? Am I making history exciting? Am I making English exciting? Yes, math teachers, am I making math exciting? Because school will never be exciting for kids until it's exciting for adults. And that's something that we've got to all work together on. It takes all of us to make school exciting. And so somehow or another, if we'll all take a little bit of the share of the burden of making school exciting, before we know it, we've got a dynamic school that kids can't wait to get to school. It doesn't mean they wouldn't choose to go to the beach if that was the option. I'm not sure we'll ever have that type of support. But it does mean that school can be exciting when they get here. I had a mom, actually I still have a mom, I had a mom, that taught me a lot about making things exciting. Making mundane things exciting things, or routine things exciting things. And my mom has never come with me to go out and speak to a group, but she's here today. Mom, stand up and wave to everybody. Right down here. Give her a hand, please. Being an inquisitive mom, she asks me all the time, you know, where am I going? What am I doing? Things like that. And we've been doing that now for, I guess, about 29 years. And I finally said to her, I said, well, you know, if you really want to know, why don't you just go with me? And so she's here today. So, Mom, thanks for coming. We've been hanging out since she flew to Dallas this weekend, and we've been hanging out since this weekend. So I'm glad to have her here supporting me today. Okay, what was the first one? Okay, every kid deserves a new school and loss report card at least once a year. Okay, what's the second one? Celebrate small successes, and they're all small successes. Okay, and the third thing? Ditto. Okay, schools will never be an exciting place for kids until it's an exciting place for adults. Okay, very good. Okay. How many of you have heard the expression, we are learner-centered? Okay, I see lots of hands. It's one of those cute catchphrases. We're learner-centered. Have you ever been in a class that said they're learner-centered and they weren't? Okay, all the new teachers are shaking their head. I know they're not talking about anybody in the room. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of times we go through student teaching and we've learned all this stuff about being learner-centered, and we go in and we see very teacher-centered stuff. And the fourth thing I want to leave you today, that I want you to think about this year, is that if all of the learners during class are centered on you, then your class isn't learner-centered. Now, I think in a lot of ways we are all performers. And I think one of the things that draws us into education is that we like being performers. You agree? Give me a show of applause if you agree that we're performers. Okay? All right? And there's not anything wrong with that. But we've got to accept and we've got to understand that when we are performing, our learners are not putting information into the long-term memory. It doesn't matter how entertaining it is. And if you want kids to perform on the STAR, then we've got to get what we're teaching them into the long-term memory. That takes overt things on the part of the learner as opposed to on the part of the teacher. And that's something that you have the most knowledge of, is how learner-centered is your class, because you're in your class every day. How much of the time do the learners spend centered on you? If all of their eyes are on you, that's a teacher-centered activity. And if you want information to go into the long-term memory of the learners, you've got to make class more learner-centered and not teacher-centered. Now, that doesn't mean, and I will tell you, Mrs. Hill taught me in many ways, that we don't mean that direct instruction is bad. Because it's not. And it's highly efficient for some tasks. not for the tasks that we want transmitted to long-term memory. But it's very efficient for giving instructions and building rubrics together as a class and lots of different things like that. But what are you doing to put the learner in the responsibility, the learning in the responsibility of the learner? Because only that learner can transfer that information to the long-term memory. And this is kind of how I'd like for you to think about this. As you think about lessons and assessments and all the things that you routinely do every day. If the transfer to long-term memory requires an overt event on the part of the learner, how much time have I reserved in this class period for that event to occur? Because I would argue it's probably the most important event that you have of class. That moment where that piece of information is all but ready to be permanently filed into the learner's memory. How much time have we allocated to allow that event to occur? Because if it's not there, all of your efforts that have led up to that have done nothing more than put the information into the short-term memory. And the moment the learner doesn't need information in the short-term memory with lightning-fast precision, our brain will discard it. In math, what we used to do, and I've worked with dozens of schools in math instruction, and in math, we used to believe the way we remember is I teach you once, and then you go home and you do it 28 more times. Just the odd ones, because the odd ones, the answers aren't in the back. Okay, y'all remember that? Okay? And the fact of the matter is that if you make learning autobiographical, if you make learning an event that the learner experiences, long-term memory never forgets it. It is there forever. And so consequently, if you'll let the learner take the responsibility for the learning. I told you about the 4-year-old turning 5. Her name is Gracie. And I have to say, she's probably the most beautiful 4-year-old turning 5 that I've ever seen. Her mother would really appreciate me saying that. And I've experienced Gracie a lot over the course of her 4 going on 5 years. And she is an incredibly well-mannered child. She is articulate. She has the vocabulary of somebody much older. And I get tickled. I get very tickled sitting and talking with her just because of the incredible things that she would say. And I would just scratch my head going, where in the world did she learn that? And so what I had not experienced until vacation was her cousin, Maddie. And Maddie came and hung out with us in Florida for 3 of those 6 days. And Gracie became a different child. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I saw Gracie unlike I had ever seen Gracie. Gracie and Maddie together expended far more brain resources than Gracie and I ever did. Maddie could challenge her and stimulate her thinking and her energy in a way that I never was able to. And I learned two really important things, and hopefully I learned them before I was in Florida last week, but I really saw this with these two girls, was, first of all, their peers can stimulate them in ways you and I can't. Their peers relate to them in ways that you and I cannot. And so if we can channel that natural energy in learning fractions, or the parts of speech, or the critical events that led up to the Civil War, then what an amazing, fun, exciting way those things can be learned. That was one of my lessons that I learned. The other lesson that I learned is I kind of understood so much more when we call the parent 16 times and they keep saying they never behave that way at home. We've all done that. I don't know why you're having a problem. They're so docile at home. They're so well-mannered at home. They're so well-behaved at home. And the fact of the matter is, they can stimulate each other in ways that you and I cannot. And so we've got to let go of some of the control in the class, because order in the class is not the same as control in the class. None of us are naturally controlled. The longer I make you sit there and be still and listen to me, the longer I do it, the more your brain resources will start thinking and be dedicated to you not sitting there and listening. And so if I really want to use this mode of communication to impact you, the first thing I have to do is realize its limitation. And that's the fact that I'm going to have your attention for a short period of time. I better hit the highlights. I better make it entertaining. And then I better trust the process enough to let you go and think about it on your own. Think about the new Labrador Retriever puppy that we're afraid to leave in the house when we go to work. What do? We contain them in a little cage or in the utility room or whatever. And the fact of the matter is, when we get home and open that door, their behavior is completely predictable, is it not? They're going to go berserk. We know that. We don't need to punish them. We ought to plan for it. I'm going to open that door, and that dog, having been locked up all day, is going to be 130% dog. And I can completely predict that behavior. Yet we ask kids to act in an unnatural way for hours on a time, and then we act surprised when they act out in a natural way, which is to go berserk. That behavior is completely predictable. I can remember Mrs. Hill. She'd say, "You know what, we need to get out of here." I'd walk down there, I'd go in, not a person in the room. They'd be out on the softball field playing softball. Impromptu softball game. They're going to expend the energy. The question is, are we going to try to get them to expend it in an unnatural way? Or are we going to embrace what they do naturally and deal with it in a more productive way? Because you don't have to work in a middle school very long to know we lose most of the hormonal battles. And so let's make a change or two to reflect that. Now, you high school teachers got it so easy. They have all of that figured out and straightened out when we've done that for you, and you don't even appreciate it, right? You know, we send them to you all well-adjusted. Okay, I give it to you. Ninth grader and well-adjusted do not belong in the same sentence. Okay, I get it. I get it. But think about how we can make class each and every day centered around the learner. You can still give of yourself and give of all the things that you bring to the table and have order in your class without controlling class to the point of unnatural behavior. Because it's not natural to sit passively for 50 minutes every day. Whether they're listening to you or working silently. I mean, we're social creatures. Our brains are incredibly social. The way I kind of illustrate this is that the brain that's not social is Ted Kaczynski. What happens to a brain that is not engaged in reflection of peers? It loses a sense of reality, just like Ted Kaczynski did. He lost all sense of what social norms were, all sense of what propriety was. Much like Jay did, he just had a better excuse. Jay had a better excuse because he was so young and hadn't been taught those proprieties. But just imagine living in a shack with none of the modern conveniences that most of us are accustomed to for years and years and years. You lose your sense of what real is. And the interesting thing about our profession and about us as professionals is we still largely have complete autonomy when we walk into that classroom and pull that door shut. We have a captive audience that is probably going to go with us wherever we go. And so how can we make it more about the individual learner? You know, another thing that we've learned about the brain, when most of us went through teacher preparation, we didn't know a lot about physiologically how the brain actually remembers stuff and processes stuff. And with PET scans and CAT scans and all of those things, we know an immense about it today. And one of the things we know is we know that the brain organizes things completely uniquely. No two learners do it the same. Let me illustrate to convince you. How many of you have gotten the first day of school memo from your principal with all the stuff that's going to happen the first day of school? Okay, principals, y'all got something to do tonight. School starts Monday. Do you realize that? Okay, but you know all the stuff that we got to do on the first day of school. We've got to deal with materials and lists and schedules and class counts and all the stuff that goes on during the course of the day. And those are really important things for us getting everything set up and leveled out and ready for the rest of the year. But just think about what you personally do with a memo that you get from your boss. Okay? And if I came around and I asked different ones of you, what do you do, what do you do, what do you do? I doubt any two of you do the same thing with it. I'm going to put it on my desk on the top so I can refer to it Monday. I put it in my principal memo file. I throw it in the garbage. I read it and pitch it in the trash. Whatever your particular need is for that information, you uniquely deal with it. Well, every human brain is the same way. Every human brain organizes the information that we find to be relevant in a unique way. I had a Texas history teacher, and we loved her. We absolutely loved her. I think she lived through most of Texas history. And she wasn't quite as bad as Ditto. But with the exception of Friday, class was incredibly predictable. Monday, she had a mimeographed outline of the chapter on our desk that we copied word for word. Okay? Nothing transmitted to long-term memory in that particular exercise. But we did it. We did it every Monday. And I'll be honest with you, we liked it. Because she was a cool teacher. She let us talk to each other while we copied that mimeograph sheet. And so we looked forward to Mondays in Texas history. We knew what we were going to be doing. We'd get into a little bit of a race because we knew that if we got finished copying it before class was out, then we could visit without having to do anything. And we thought that was all pretty cool. Being a good history teacher, and I can say this because I was one, on Tuesdays, you know on Tuesdays we always do a map in history. If it was worth writing a note on Monday, it's worth drawing a map and coloring it on Tuesday. And we did a map each and every Tuesday in Texas history for that entire 7th grade year. Again, we got to visit with each other, so we thought that was pretty righteous. Cool. Looked forward to that. Wednesday, we actually had to do a little bit of work because we had to take what we had collected on Monday and Tuesday, and we had to start putting it in a chronology so that we could do the famous social studies timeline. Because as you know, it isn't social studies if you cannot put it in a timeline. And you've got to know what happened first and what happened second. You got to know the key people that were involved. All of those things came to culmination in Mrs. Menard's class on Wednesdays. Thursday, movie day. Y'all remember, some of you, the big 35 millimeter. You know, you come into class and you would look to see how long the reel was. Because you knew, oh, that one's going to take us all class. I could probably take a little nap today. Because the lights will be out, nobody will know. You know, just had lunch, it's time for a little nap. And we did that each and every Thursday. Friday, we had a love-hate relationship with. We hated the first 15 minutes where we regurgitated what we learned in a one-page kind of test that we would fill out. And then we would take all that quality learning and we would put it into a folder that had 5 dividers for each of those 5 activities. And then we would turn that folder in, and the quicker we got that done, Mrs. Menard would then tell us stories of Texas history. And finally, after a hard week's work, finally the history comes alive for us. And we loved her telling stories. If only she could tell a story every day, I think we would have really loved history as opposed to just loving the class that we got to visit and talk and what have you. Now, she was trying to teach us, in addition to some Texas history, she was trying to teach us a logical way to organize stuff, a logical way to present information. It also gave us a great artifact that we would then take home and have Mom sign it and then bring it back. All those kind of things. But where it fell so short, we didn't know then, but we know now, is that we were organizing it to her long-term memory. It made perfect sense to her. To us, it was simply an exercise. And a time-consuming one. We did this for like 36 weeks. And then we called that Texas history. So I'll argue she made it exciting, she made it come alive for about half the period on Friday. In the other 4 days, I'm not sure that we were challenged to peak performance. And we loved her. I'm telling you, we loved Mrs. Bernard. She may still be teaching Texas history right down there at Seabrook Intermediate. She would be a little over 200 years old now. And so what can you do this year to make your class more learner-centered? Put the responsibility on them for the intellectual babble they prepare for you. Is that the right term, Dr. Glenn? Because only then are you learner-centered. The responsibility for learning has to be on the learner. We take far too much of the responsibility. And the fact of the matter is we know they've got the brain that they can do it. Okay, so where do we go? One more time. What was the first one?
New school loss report card.
Every kid deserves a new school loss report card at least once a year. Second, celebrate small successes, and they're all small successes. Third, schools will never be an exciting place for kids if they're not an exciting place for adults. And if learners are centered on you, your class, and your classroom is not learner-centered. And I think if you take those 4 ideas, I think you'll see a lot of similarity in the 4 of them. But take all 4 of those ideas and wrap it into a little bit of reflection on some of the same great lessons that you've been delivering. Add one more little ingredient, and that is love them the most when they're the least lovable. And I think you'll have a great school year. It has been my absolute pleasure being here with you today. And I hope that maybe I've contributed a little something to your great school year and all of the good kids of Central Heights. I thank you.